This is the EVP Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to another episode of the EVP Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Beaker.
And I am another one of your hosts, Ghosty.
And I'm going to just introduce myself. I am a guest host. Name is Castle. Some of you may recognize me from the old Paranormal Hour podcast I was on, and I've been a guest on this podcast.
You don't even remember the name of our old show?
No, Supernatural Hour. What did I say?
The Paranormal Hour.
Yeah.
It had so many names. It started out with the Wisp Show, and then we switched it to Supernatural Hour.
It's also been like 3 or 4 years since I was on that podcast.
Yeah, I think you left a year before I did. So you left end of 2019. I left at end of 2020.
Yeah. Anyway, it's been a while.
It's been a while. If you want to know more about Castle, go back to listen to episode 98, I think.
Or you can just read all the Marvel comics on him, on Gary Castle, also known as the Punisher.
Yeah, do that too.
Definitely me. You can tell by the dark
hair. John Bernthal, or whatever his name is.
Bernthal
did a great job portraying
yeah.
him in that Netflix series.
That was actually a phenomenal series. I'm sad that Disney got the rights and
no,
Netflix
they're going on with it. They are going on with it. Yep.
They are. So they've already started bringing characters from that Netflix series into their own series. So I don't have Disney Plus anymore, but Echo just came out.
It's got
the
Kingpins in it.
So is this going to be Disney Plus or Netflix?
This is Disney Plus.
Really? I'm surprised because I thought Disney would be like distancing themselves from the Punisher as far as possible.
So what's funny is all of those Netflix series, all of the Defenders from Netflix, this is totally has to do with the paranormal, by the way. It's all on Disney Plus.
It all ties in, people. We promise.
It ties in. So Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, Luke Cage, Defenders, Punisher is all on Disney Plus now.
That is actually awesome because I thought all of those series were phenomenal, and I was sad when the rights switched and they kind of killed them on Netflix.
They started tying it back in with Hawkeye that came out last year. They also tied it in a little bit with the
Echo series,
the Spider-Man movie, and now they've brought it. I think the main bad guy in Echo is Kingpin. Spoiler alert.
And how this all ties in is when they took these off of Netflix, I got sad, went to a deep depression, and quit doing paranormal podcasting.
That's true.
Yep.
It might not be true, but it sure sounds like a good tie-in.
So now we're slowly easing him back in. We're going to bring him on once a year to get his feet wet again. Hopefully he'll be back more. Castle, for those of you who don't remember, if you haven't listened to that episode, Castle and I are really good friends. He's actually the one that brought me on to the old paranormal team that we were on and taught me a lot about how to investigate. And he's the reason why I do a lot of things that I do now.
And on the flip side, I have learned a lot of things from Tim. And, in fact, as I look back to all the investigations, my favorite ones, every single one, Tim has been on it because...
Well, it's because I'm awesome.
Yeah, Tim is fun to investigate with. He knows his stuff, and he's very intuitive, very empathic, and that honestly has saved us a lot on investigations of trying to get to the bottom of things because Tim can feel what's going on, and it's awesome.
Yes.
When things get squatchy, he's the guy to have around.
Yes, Ginger Squatch is the guy you want to call. You're going to call him, not Ghostbusters, Ginger Squatch and the EVP team. Right. So, last week we talked about UFOs.
Yep.
It was interesting. No one emails us anymore, but we'd like it if you did. No, I think it was a really good episode. And we do plan on doing more UFO episodes. We'll probably at one point discuss Antarctica. There's stuff going on there. Alaska Triangle, if you haven't heard of that, we'll probably be doing that one as well. And then what was the Phoenix Lights was another one that's on our list.
Then the congressional hearing that happened
last year. Yeah. So we've got a lot. If you like the alien episodes, look forward to those. We've got more coming. We might throw in some more cryptid shows for Nicole. We'll have the Queen of Cryptids back on at some point in time. She needs to come and talk to us about Mothman.
And
that's on the list. Stuff. I know we're like close to the end of January here, so we're just kind of throwing out some stuff there that you can look forward to throughout this year. But today we're actually going to Pennsylvania, I believe, right?
Yes, it is Pennsylvania.
Pittston, Pennsylvania, to be specific.
So the reason why I brought Castle on this one is on our old show, he kept pushing and pushing and pushing for me to do this episode, and I never looked into it, and I never did.
This is a freaking badass case, by the way.
It is.
So
it is.
I happened to be listening to an audio book that talked about this case, and I was like, why in the hell did I never let him do this? So this is why he's here. This is probably his favorite case that he's. I think for me personally, the most research I've done on any case is Amityville. I think it might be fair to say that for you, this is the case you've done the most research on.
Yeah, this case, just to kind of give it some background, there was a made-for-TV movie back in, I believe it was 1991, and I was middle of high school, probably a sophomore or junior, I can't remember which, and I saw this made-for-TV movie, and I'll be honest with you, it kind of scared the bejesus out of me. It was actually one of the few paranormal shows, fictionalized, well, not fictionalized, but dramatized instances that actually kind of creep me out. But it starts with this family, the Smurl family, and they didn't start in Pittston, Pennsylvania. They actually were down south, I believe, and their home was destroyed in some major flooding.
It was Hurricane Agnes.
That's right, Hurricane Agnes. And so it basically wiped out everything they had. They didn't have a whole lot of money. And so Jack and Janet Smurl.
Didn't they like fix it up in the government? It's like, thanks for your service in the military. And then they took the home from them.
That I don't know. I didn't do that much research into the before Pittston. Okay. But I know that basically they kind of lost their shorts in that hurricane. And so Jack's parents found this duplex in Pittston, Pennsylvania, and said, hey, we're going to buy this duplex. You want to go in on us with it, and we're going to move into this new duplex. And so that's kind of how this case starts, is with them moving up to this duplex in Pennsylvania.
So just like any famous demonic haunting, it started out with the family had money problems. With a move and money problems.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you're stressed out. You've lost your house. You've lost basically your whole life's investment in a home, all your money. You're stressed out. You're moving to a new place. So from the get-go, you've just got a ton of stress on the family right out of the gate.
And this is a new family, too, because I believe when they first moved in, I love the inconsistencies across the internet because they moved in anywhere from 1973 to 1975.
I believe it was actually 73, though.
73? Okay. Because like Wikipedia says 74, the made-for-TV movie says 1975. Yeah. So it was just, I think 73 is what I'm going with because I think that's what the Warrens actually said in the interview that I read about them. 1973 is when they moved in. And I believe at the time, they only had the two daughters were born at the time. They were both just very little. They were probably like 3-4 years old.
I believe it was Karen and Heather. I can't remember if those were the young. I know that's the name of two.
Dawn and Heather.
Dawn and Heather were the
two oldest.
And then Karen and another daughter.
The twins.
Shannon. So the twins, Shannon and Karen, were born a little bit later.
Right.
So now this duplex, just to kind of paint a picture for all your listeners, was not like moving into a duplex now where it's nice and fancy and it's got new appliances put in by the contractor. This place was kind of
a picture of it.
This place was a dump. It was a dump. And so the idea was they got it on the cheap and they were going to renovate it. So Jack and his dad were basically starting to renovate this place, tear out walls, tear out plumbing. And anybody who's listened to any of these episodes or done any paranormal research, when you start renovating a place, a lot of times it can stir up activity. And this was no different.
The ghosts come out and you start banging walls.
It makes them mad, especially when you put in a new bathtub and a new toilet or a new sink in one of the bathrooms. Normally you just go, hey, this looks cool. It looks good now. You're not expecting to see talon marks scratching the shit out of everything.
Right. And so what's crazy is, so some of the first activity, in like any case, the activity starts out small. And Jack doesn't even really get any of the activity personally until later in the case.
Right. He doesn't even believe his wife.
Yeah, he thinks she's crazy.
Yeah, it's mostly kind of focused to his wife in the beginning.
I think a little bit was towards his mom, too, wasn't it?
Yeah, his mom and his
wife. Because it was
like
bouncing back and forth between the two sides of the duplex.
And anybody who knows anything about demonic spirits, they tend to target women more than men. There's an innate hatred towards women because demonic spirits know that women create life. And Eve took the apple, if we want to get deep into the religious context of it. And so demonic spirits really have an extra hard hatred towards women because they are creators, which they cannot do.
I thought it was because of their driving.
That could be. But I do not endorse that. No.
I don't know where I found this guy.
Yeah. Who's the stranger on the podcast? We don't even know. So some of the first activity that starts out is basically they're renovating this duplex. And they've got leaky plumbing. They've got shitty torn up sinks, toilets. things of that nature. And then they've got stains on both the carpet and the walls. And so, what do you do when you move into a place like that? Well, you clean the carpet, you repaint the walls, you start fixing leaky plumbing, start replacing torn up sinks and toilets. And, that's the first thing you do when you renovate a place like that, start getting rid of the crappy stuff with new stuff.
Tear the carpets out.
Well, immediately on painting these stains, within a day or two, the stains seeped right back through the paint. They'd repaint them again and the stains would come back out.
Well, and that could be something as simple as like a current water leak, leaky pipes, right?
Exactly.
And it can keep bleeding through the paint.
The other thing that was weird was they would get a rug, and there would be a stain that would appear on a brand new rug that they just laid down.
Mm-hmm.
Also, leaky pipes.
Leaky pipes.
And that's that's how these things start. It's stuff that can be explained away. Just because you've got stains that reappear under your paint doesn't mean that you got the demons.
They were also getting things would go missing, and then reappear where they placed them after they've looked for it.
That sounds like me doing any home improvement project. Where the hell did I put that screwdriver?
Well, in the movie, so the movie's called The Haunting. You can currently find it on...
Or The Haunted.
The Haunted?
The
Yeah, The Haunted. Book was written in 1986, movie 1991, like you said. It's currently on YouTube. You can watch the whole movie. There was one scene where it's towards the very beginning of the movie where they went over something like that with the missing
hammer.
items. It was the hammer went completely missing. They couldn't find it. Fast forward 2 years later, because I think you're right. It says they moved in 73 and 75. Maybe it was 10 years later, so about 85, somewhere in there. They did a scene where the daughter's poster was torn, and they were looking for the Scotch tape, and she had put it on Janet had put it on the counter, and they couldn't find it. They were looking all over for it. They rushed the kids out the door because their ride's there to pick them up. And Janet goes and opens the fridge, puts the milk away, and the tape is sitting on one of the shelves inside the fridge.
Yeah.
So just small stuff like that to make you think you're going crazy.
Make you think you're going crazy and just kind of wondering, who's pranking me, who's moving stuff around. And honestly, most of these really bad hauntings start with little stuff like this. Some of the other things that happened, Jack would go in and he'd replace plumbing. There'd be leaky pipes. He'd replace them. And then, a few days later, same pipes would be leaking again. Again, easily explained away. Maybe Jack's just a shitty plumber. But, he'd replace them and then, again, there'd be problems. And honestly, Tim and I have experienced plumbing issues on investigations.
We have.
Tim's leaky pipe. Beaker's leaky pipes.
It was very, very random because we were all just standing in the kitchen talking, and then a pipe underneath the sink broke and just started flooding the kitchen.
Yeah, it was like someone had just ripped out the flexible pipe for the faucet in the wall and just...
Yeah, we looked at it. We got the water shut off and we were able to put the pipe back together, but we were kind of looking at it, and the way it came off, there's no way it just fell off on its own. Something had to have pulled on it. And
also, in counterpoint to that too, we were also talking about getting rid of an entity that was there, and we'd kind of found its anchor to that particular home, and so it was not happy.
So, yeah, we'll take care of this first, fellas. Bam.
Yeah. You never get rid of me, see?
Yeah.
You'll be busy fixing that
You want
plumbing.
to take me out of here alive, copper? Yeah.
So that's kind of how this all starts. And then Janet, she'd be down, in the basement doing laundry or whatnot, and she would hear her mother-in-law, calling for her, and she'd go upstairs and...
Janet!
There'd be nobody there. She'd go next door. Mother-in-law was out, doing grocery shopping. There'd nobody home, basically, on either side of the duplex.
And that's what reminded me that I remember this made-for-TV movie was this part. The whole hearing you're being called and then no one being there. I remember seeing this when I was a kid because of that part. That's what sparked that memory, core memory.
And I remember when I was first watching this when I was, in high school. This kind of freaked me out a little bit when I heard this because I'm like, ugh. I actually grew up, and I've talked about this I can't remember if I talked about this on your podcast or if I've talked about it when I used to be on the Supernatural Hour, but I grew up in being babysat by my great aunt, and she had this house built in the 19 teens, and you'd go in the basement and hear footsteps and things like that, and so being in that creepy basement, that part of that made-for-TV movie is oh yeah, because I experienced similar things, not necessarily voices, but you could definitely hear stuff going on upstairs when nobody was home. And so the haunting started with just little stuff like that.
And then the mother-in-law thought she heard her daughter-in-law swearing up a storm next door through the walls, just saying the nastiest stuff ever.
I guess it almost sounded like that Jack and Janet were arguing and swearing at each other, and Jack wasn't even home.
Yeah.
Well, they actually had several instances throughout the haunting, and not to jump too far ahead in this, but I mean, Jack's parents would hear just what sounded like horrible, like domestic violence stuff going on in Jack and Janet's apartment. Like, it sounded really violent, yelling, screaming, profanities, to the one point where Jack's dad, and I honestly don't remember his parents' names.
It's Mary and John.
Okay, so John is like, what the hell's going on?
Did he go next door?
Yeah, he's like, I've had enough of this. And this is at nighttime. So he goes next door, knocks on the door, nobody comes to the door, walks in, and everybody's sound asleep. So he's like, oh, well, maybe I was mistaken. Mm-hmm. So he goes back to his apartment, or his side of the duplex, and boom, it starts up again. And I have a very hard time. Now, I've worked 25 years as a police officer. I've dealt with many real-life domestic violence cases in person, and very rarely, I mean never, is anybody having like a domestic dispute, and then someone knocks on the door and everyone's like, sure, you get in bed, pretend like you're sleeping. Okay, he's gone, let's resume.
Wait, that's not normal?
I have had people play possum, but they don't like resume 2 seconds after after I leave. And so just kind of eerie stuff like that is kind of how this all started. Now, Janet started to report that she would be molested while she was in bed. And there's no account that really explains to me what molested is. And what I mean by that is, I don't know if someone's like pulling a Trump on her and just grabbing her by the crotch, or if a little bit of only those
Tune
who can
in
see
Tokyo.
Tune in Tokyo, or a slap by, or a
full on crotch grab.
Yeah, so
a full on horse ride.
So they didn't really explain what molested meant, but I'm assuming she was. Well, I know she was touched inappropriately. I just don't know where or how. It could be both, could be one, could be either. But she reported that quite a bit. Now, we mentioned they were replacing toilets and sinks, and Tim talked about it a little bit. Tell us, Tim, what happened with those toilets and sinks that got replaced.
So they were replacing some of the toilets and sinks, like you said, in one of the bathrooms, I believe on Jack and Janet's side. And it was shortly, almost immediately after. Now, this is some of the stuff I have in my notes. This is directly from an interview from Ed and Lorraine Warren that they did. And they said almost immediately after those two items were replaced, they found talon marks all over everything, as if a beast with claws had gone over everything.
Which is crazy because, I mean, anyone who knows what a toilet or sink is made out of, I mean, sinks are usually iron or ceramic coated in a porcelain enamel.
And this was the 80s, 70s, so everything was made out of steel.
Right. Still with that, enamel coating. And the toilet was probably ceramic, again, with that porcelain enamel coating.
The porcelain throne.
And honestly, for something to scratch the crap out of us, it's not easy to scratch porcelain unless you're really, really trying. That stuff is pretty durable. And if I recall, I think they replaced those a couple times, and they were scratched up both times.
Most likely. That would make sense.
Other issues they had scratchings and scrapings on wallpaper and walls.
And then themselves, too. They'd wake up with scratches, not knowing how those got there.
And so initially, Jack just thought, my kids are little shits.
Well, he wasn't believing his wife, too.
Right.
She was hearing the voices and all that stuff.
Yeah. And for those who are familiar with these demonic type hauntings, that's usually how they start. They usually start targeting one or two people in the family, and then usually they start bringing in more and more people, and usually there's 2 or 3 people in the family who are like, yeah, they're nuts. And they do that on purpose. The idea is to kind of sow discontent and distrust.
But then the mother-in-law and his wife, Janet, they started to talk and started realizing they were both experiencing weird shit.
Right. They started comparing notes and going, wait a minute.
So one of the things that they both experienced was the black figure.
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me about the black figure, Tim.
So Janet actually saw, and I have it here.
I think this is what brought them seeing the same thing at the same
This
time.
is, I think, is what connected the two, and they realized. So we did talk about how Janet was often home alone doing housework by herself. She'd hear the names and stuff like that. One day, Janet saw a black human-shaped figure that appeared to be wearing some kind of cape. The room she was in became very cold, and she just kind of stood there and watched it. And all of a sudden, she realized that like she could see right through this figure. Okay, she remained calm, according to Lorraine Warren, and she said she let this demonic form just kind of pass right through her house, and it went next door into the other side of the duplex. So she went over to check on her mother-in-law, see how she was doing. And at that point, Mary had actually confirmed and said she had seen the same figure.
Well, she was like frozen and like still staring in that direction.
Well, what's interesting is I mentioned that Janet stayed calm. And I personally have seen a few apparitions in my time. And you would think that you'd like lose your shit and go crazy and be like, ah. But every time I've seen something, it's actually been kind of an experience where I've kept my cool and haven't really. I mean, it's
Yeah, TikTok has taught me anything. When you see a spirit, you get your phone out, record it, and you freak out. No, it's like you said. We've seen apparitions, and you're kind of like, remember the orb that we saw at Benson Grist Mill? It was more of like you're kind of in a surreal state where like you're just kind of your brain is trying to process it. Like, am I really seeing this?
Was that real? Am I going crazy?
Yeah.
You're not like freaked out. In fact, I actually had an instance where I actually watched a full figure apparition cross in front of me and two other individuals and into a wall. In fact, I remember it distinctly. It was a man. It was a perfectly black silhouette of a man. He had a little yellow glow just right on the edges of his silhouette. I still remember his shirt was bunched up kind of where it went to his pants in the front, which would be typical of someone who had a button-up shirt. And he walked right in front of me and two other people and into a wall. And you hear me on the audio go, "Did you guys just see that?" And you hear the other two people go, "Yep." And I go, "Cool." Because it was a cool experience. It wasn't scary at all. So, that's consistent with, Janet saying at first she just saw it and was like, "What is that?" And just kind of watched it and been like, huh. I'm sure it kind of spooked her later, but at the moment, like Tim said, your brain is more just like.
It's more of when it disappears. That's when it's like, what the Yeah.
Yeah, is this real? What am I just seeing?
Yep, but in the moment, you're captivated.
Yeah, and,
Well,
and your
sure,
brain's
like-
trying to process the reality of it and, what it could possibly be that you're familiar with.
Like you said, when she went to check on Mary was kind of in the same kind of state there. So, I mean, they both were just kind of like, you're just trying to process it, like trying to decide if you're going crazy, or if you're seeing things, or if it's really happening.
Well, and after this instance, they started to see this black figure more and more. That's not me about the beeping.
I don't think it's me.
That sounds far away. That's a car alarm if
not me.
anybody's wondering what we're talking about.
But I do that. You probably won't hear that in the audio.
We all look panicked.
I'm putting my keys on the desk. So
I
it's
feel
not-
my
it's not me.
pockets, and I'm like, oh, good, they're my coat over there, so it's not me. But yeah, so they start seeing this figure more and more. In fact, it's described as kind of like Tim said, black kind of humanoid form with a cape. It's also described as having just holes where the eyes are supposed to be.
To me, it almost seems like Zorro is kind of what pops in my head. Because, he wears all black. He's got, the eye holes, but it would make sense. We've talked about Lucy before where her eyes were just black. Like, there's just holes, like, black where her eyes should be.
And that's kind of how this sounds, is just that kind of black holes. And so for those not familiar with demonology, and I don't know if you guys have talked about this on some of your other episodes.
No, I don't think we have.
But a demonic spirit cannot manifest with a perfect human body. If you see a spirit and it's demonic, there's going to be some kind of flaw with it. No eyes, missing hand. They cannot manifest a perfect human body. I don't know why that is, but they cannot. There'll be some kind of flaw, some kind of something wrong with it. And that would be consistent here, the black holes for eyes.
And I think Ed and Lorraine Warren were talking about where this spirit wasn't like a shadow figure or anything, but it could turn into like pretty much transparent, go through wall, but then become physical and solid as cement.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting with this too is at one point Janet actually heard her mother-in-law calling her name. She's down doing laundry kind of thing, and here's Janet, goes upstairs, and she actually saw this figure and saw its mouth moving using her mother-in-law's voice. So she actually witnessed it mimicking her
Oh
mother-in-law.
my God, that gave me the creeps.
Yeah, and that would freak you the hell out.
That
thank
gave
you.
me the creeps.
All kinds of nope. And honestly, you'd probably ask yourself at this point, well, why isn't this family just, packing up and getting the hell out of here? But again, they lost everything they owned in the hurricane. They're just dumped everything they had left into this duplex.
Same
And
old
then-
story. No money.
And isn't this the time now that Jack starts experiencing his night emissions?
Yeah.
The nocturnal emissions?
Well, that was a little bit later on. I think the first time he had an instance with that was in 1986 when the Warrens were finally getting
It wasn't even till then. That was kind of like the last straw that got...
If I recall, his very first experience that he had personally is he would come home from work and sometimes he would try and unwind by sitting down in front of the TV and watching, TV till he fell asleep. Or he'd watch TV till it was time for bed. Well, one night he sat down in front of the TV, actually fell asleep, and woke up to what I could best describe as a sleep paralysis type situation. Mm-hmm. He's awake, can't move, and basically sees this entity that's been described to him. Freaks him the hell out. He also describes seeing a figure that was kind of a amalgamation between a human and a pig.
Yep.
Kind of like a human body with kind of a weird elongated pig head.
Man, bear, pig.
Yeah, man, bear, pig. Freaked him the hell out. And from that time on, he actually would never sit down after work to watch TV to unwind because it was...
Terrorized his ass.
Exactly.
And
So one of the ways they described this entity was it was an old, like, hag-like woman that had scales on her skin and white scraggly hair, and some of her teeth were missing.
well, the scales he talked about were as if somebody were to have leprosy, like leprosy scales, and like pus oozing out. Like just the most grossest shit you wouldn't want on your body. That's what this thing looked like, crawling all over him.
And they mentioned yellow and green kind of gums. Mm-hmm. And this entity actually accosted...
Succubus style.
Yeah, succubus style, went after Jack.
And he's... the grossest part, because he would go into detail, was that he was saying he knew this thing was orgasming, but the way it would spasm on him. So he was like, this thing was getting pleasure out of it and going through orgasms while riding on top of him. It's like, ew.
So, I mean, in the interview with Ed and Lorraine Warren, when they talked about this first case, I think they said, like, one of the first instances he was up in his bedroom. It happened more than once where this thing accosted him. But after it got done, it just vanished. And, the interviewer asked him, well, couldn't it have been just a nightmare? And he's like, yeah. He's like, at first thought you'd think it would be a nightmare until Jack was able to actually kind of get up, and he staggered to the bathroom and found this, like, yellow ooze all over
On his body?
On his body.
Some
That-
biological fluid.
Go squirt.
The exact words that from Ed Warren is that the initial thought is it might have been a nightmare, but when Jack went into the bathroom, he found himself covered in a very sticky substance that had been emitted by the creature's vagina.
Ectoplasm orgasm.
Ew.
For sure.
What makes this even more scary is the fact that, like, I believe it was the next morning. I think Janet was downstairs when one of the cases happened. It was hot, so she would go downstairs to sleep. And so she wasn't there when it all happened, but Jack did tell her about it. Like, hey, this happened.
I cheated on you with Demon.
Yes. What makes it even more scary, though, is I believe it was the next morning, their oldest daughter, Dawn, had come downstairs to have breakfast and told Jack about this dream she had where he was attacked by this entity.
The daughter also experienced being attacked as well. She also got attacked.
She got attacked while she was in the shower. Mm-hmm. And I think at this time, like, when it started really ramping up, because you got to keep in mind, we're talking a period of almost like
13 years.
More than that. 73 to 89.
Oh, you mean the whole time they lived
So
there?
the whole time they lived in the house, 73 to 89.
years.
But at this point,
16.
we're looking about 12, 13 years when it really ramped up, and he was, Jack was getting attacked by the succubus. His daughter was dreaming about the attacks.
Well, and Janet was getting attacked by an incubus type spirit
Yes.
as well.
Mm-hmm. And then during all this, too, there were times where the dog was levitating, and the family Wasn't this before they
I
called
think
Ed
it
and
was one
Lorraine?
of the first things that they witnessed is the dog levitating.
Yeah,
and
the
get thrown
dog
against the
levitating,
wall.
and they all just like, what the hell? And then bam, gets thrown against the wall. And of course, and then that happened to the daughter. It would, she would wake up or have dreams of levitating, or wake up levitating.
Or she would also see people levitating near the ceiling, like
But-
not just her, like other people levitating near the ceiling.
Well, Janet also levitated
And got
many
thrown.
times and got thrown. Actually, got thrown out of the room. In fact, one of the daughters, and I can't remember.
Shannon.
Excuse me, Shannon. Shannon got levitated and then thrown down the stairs of the
Right.
home.
Yes, she got thrown on the stairs. The mom got thrown against the wall. Dog got thrown against the wall. And I don't remember if anyone else got.
Like Dawn had the incident in the shower where she felt something grab her arms and it was touching her inappropriately, and she was able to finally get out of the shower and ran down the hall like screaming for her parents to let them know what happened. So like this thing at this point, after 10, 12, 13 years, however long it's been, like Castle said, it starts out slow with like one or two people, and now it's gotten to the point where
And little things that can be easily explained away.
right. So it just over 10-year period, it just ramped up and it was attacking the whole family.
So in a demonic type haunting, this would be considered like the encroachment, where the little things happen, and and they target one or two people. So that's the encroachment, and then it moves into the infestation phase, and that's when you're starting to get people to levitate. That's when you're starting to get these major attacks, and then the next step is kind of oppression, where things get really bad. Now, the Smurl family, they were kind of at their wits' end. They didn't quite know what to do, and they actually saw an interview on TV with Ed and Lorraine Warren, and so they actually contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren to see if they would come investigate the case, which they were, happy to do. And I know that you guys have talked about the Warrens before.
We had like all 3-part series on the Warrens.
And they're a controversial pair. I mean, there's those who think they're really good. There's those who think they make the problems worse. There's those who think they're in it just for the money.
I'm all three of those.
I
A lot of their money came from their lectures, though. Like kind
Right.
of going back and doing a little more research on the Warrens. Like I've said, like I did feel like the Warrens were opportunist, because there are some cases where people have talked about how the Warrens just showed up uninvited, like they heard about the case. This one, I don't think was necessarily the case. 'Cause like you said, they contacted the Warrens themselves, as far as I know, because this was heavily covered in the media, on the news. But the Warrens were involved before the media coverage
Yeah,
started.
from what I had seen, it was somebody close to the wife, to Janet. Their parents were helped by the Warrens on a case, and so they knew about the Warrens already. And when they had found out that what they were dealing with and what Janet was talking about and dealing with, she was like, "Hey, I have these people you can contact who helped my parents out with their situation. It sounds like you guys have a situation that these guys could help you with." So they reached out to them via that, I think, employer or co-worker.
I have personally said in the past, I feel like they're opportunists, and I still believe that way. But at the same time, along with Hollins Holzer, like these two different groups of people have done a lot for the paranormal field. They have brought awareness to it, and they have done a lot of research. I don't necessarily agree with everything they do, because the Warrens, to me, they're very, very Catholic. So there's a lot of religion, especially the Catholic religion, that goes into what they do. To me, some of that stuff doesn't make sense growing up LDS, and now I'm studying more paganism. I don't necessarily agree with like everything's demonic, but there is the possibility, especially in this case, like looking into it, succubus and incubus, very real, very, very dangerous types of demons. I don't think in this case at all the Warrens were out to make a quick buck. They legit wanted to help this family.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, and I've actually spoken with personally. I've spoken with Lorraine Warren.
I remember when you told me about that.
Yeah,
You thought you had like an automated recording or something.
Well, they used to, before the Warrens passed away, they used to have like a Halloween dinner at their house where you could go tour their museum. And I was actually
Didn't they do like the dinner with Annabelle?
Yeah, basically. And so I was actually interested in going to that. And so I called the number to kind of get some more information. And, when the phone rings and I hear, "Hello, this is Lorraine." I'm like, "What the?" So I actually had a really good, like, hour and a half conversation with Lorraine Warren on the phone. Very sweet lady, very nice. And I've actually got some Warren's paraphernalia. I've got one of her religious coins that she used to take on investigations. So I don't know. I've got mixed feelings on the Warrens. I think they did a lot for the paranormal community. I think ultimately they were
Too Catholic. What?
I think they were trying to. I think they genuinely were trying to help people. I do think they were a little opportunistic, but honestly,
But I mean, you look at like those are just the big high-profile cases that I'm talking
Right.
about. So when you look at like Amityville and the Edenfield case, those two cases to me, it felt like they were being opportunistic because like the Amityville case is when Lorraine said, "Now the WB or Warner Brothers owns us," but. That's just, I mean, you look at the Conjuring series, you know, we're coming up on the fourth one that's most likely based on this case, if not for sure based on this case. You look at those cases, and yeah, it does kind of seem like they're being a little opportunistic. But you got to keep in mind, they had over 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 cases. Like,
and that's exactly where I was going to go. I was going to say, yeah, we've heard about some of the high-profile cases, but there's hundreds of cases that they've not talked about that have not been major. And honestly, if I went back over my, I'm using the air quotations here, career as a paranormal investigator, I've got 4 or 5 really high profile cases I could talk about. And I've got probably a few hundred cases that were just kind of,
yeah,
You
you
know?
and I, we've done well over, I want to say close to 200 investigations together.
I'd say probably even closer to 3.
And you go back and listen to our old podcast. We pretty much only talked about like the ones that were really exciting, you know.
You know, Cleve Evans, we talked about the Ishii house.
And we had both of those people on to tell their stories as well.
But regardless, but they bring in the Warrens, and you know the Warrens come in, and for those who don't know Lorraine, she's a clairvoyant, a medium, and she identifies 4 spirits in the home. She identifies an older man who killed his wife, identifies his wife's spirit. I believe there's an old woman. Is that right?
Yeah, an old woman.
And then they identify a really powerful demonic spirit. And what I find interesting with this, and I would be curious to hear your thoughts on this, Tim, is we've had a lot of cases where we go into a house that's having a lot of activity, and there's usually 1 or 2 demonic type spirits in there running the show with a handful of, I would say, oppressed spirits.
Yeah, I think the best example that I've ever given for a situation like this is if you've seen The Conjuring 2, where they had Bill Wilkins or whatever his name was. That made it seem like he was the one that was doing all the bad stuff. When
My name's Bill.
yeah, when realistically behind the scenes it was a demonic entity. So we dealt with a lot of residential investigations where at the forefront you would have 1 or 2 like actual human spirits that were very noticeable to the family. And then when we get there, that's when we start looking into it and we find that there's a demonic entity or a negative inhuman spirit there that is kind of manipulating and controlling these other spirits to more or less do its bidding for them so it can kind of hang out in the background. What I find interesting about this is when I'm listening to this interview with Ed and Lorraine Warren, you know, we've talked about, 10 years of like the encroachment, the infestation, the whole oppression thing. The 10 years at least, 13 years, because Warren's got involved in 1986. So 13 years of this family dealing with this, right? So, like you said, they contact the Warrens come. So when they're on their way, they kind of knew something was up because there was these really strong winds that almost like pushed the car off the road. They had to pull over for a minute, and one of the demonologists they brought along with them kind of joked with Ed like, "Oh, I didn't know I was going to have to bring my crash helmet for this." But what I thought was interesting is, so heavy gusts of wind, but when they get to the house, this is kind of, I'm not going to go verbatim I just kind of paraphrased the interview here, but when the Warrens first arrived at the house, it was a very pleasant day, minus the, with the big gust of winds. They said the neighborhood was very peaceful. From the outside, nothing looked to be wrong. They could usually get kind of a feeling of the place right away when they got there. And we've had that too when we're on residential house investigations. And I know Ghosty as well. Like when we pull up to a house, sometimes you get the heebie-jeebies, right? You kind of like, okay, there's definitely something not right in this house. So they get there and everything seemed like it was fine. Now their first impression of the house, as well as the Smurls, was that they weren't even sure that they were at the right house. They thought they were maybe at the wrong place, but they felt like Lorraine felt that both the Smurls and the house was very tranquil. They were very middle class and very upstanding. They said usually many of the families they investigate where there's evidence of demonic infestation, they could usually sense the trouble right away, but they didn't feel anything from the outside of the house. They said many families that they dealt with would experience some sort of problems outside of the demonic. They would they'd go to homes that there would be broken homes, or the couples would be on the brink of divorce, or the children were so distraught that they needed to see psychiatrists. They also learned that a lot of families that they were having trouble with the supernatural would also run into a pattern, other patterns such as like alcoholism, adultery, or even child abuse. And this was definitely not the case with the Smurls. The Warrens found that they were very hardworking, very honest people who had raised well-behaved, happy children. And like I said, they weren't even sure they were at the right house when they first got there.
Which is interesting, and I'm going to kind of sidetrack here for just a second, because this reminds me of a recent investigation that I was involved in. So myself and my sister, we got called to go assist a family that was having some issues. And similar to what Tim just described, about 5 blocks from the house, me and my sister both started getting the heebie-jeebies. We both kind of looked at each other at the same time and said, "Can you feel that?" And we're like, "Ugh, we're walking into something bad." And then when we get to the house, it's in a upper middle class neighborhood. The house is nice. The couple who lives there opens the door, and we're both kind of like, "Are we at the right house?" Because these people look, successful upper middle class retirees. Their home inside is beautiful and immaculate. And we walk in, there's just this peaceful, calm feeling, just a really positive spiritual feeling. And me and my sister are both just like, "Are we at the right house?" Same kind of thing. And talking to this family, they had a son who lived in the basement, who was involved in some stuff he shouldn't have been. And eventually, after talking to him for like a half hour, this couple, they said, "Well, do you want to see the basement?" And it was interesting because this couple is very religious, very devout religious. And as you walk into their basement, like the minute you cross the threshold from the upstairs to the downstairs, it was literally like flipping on, or maybe flipping off a light switch. You went from calm, peaceful religion to basically walking into Satan's armpit. I mean, the heebie-jeebies were like level 50 on the Richter scale.
I don't know if you've told me about this house before. How recent was this?
Probably a few months ago.
Okay, so someone else has been to the same house, or I've heard another story very similar to this where the parents upstairs very religious.
I may have told you. I may have told you about it at the Benson Grist.
Yeah, it might have been that, because I remember this where you told me like, yeah,
it was the strangest experience I've ever had.
It was literally like heaven upstairs, hell downstairs.
Absolutely, it was such a bizarre, interesting.
I remember this story. I was like that. I don't think I've personally ever experienced anything like that.
I haven't either, and it was the weirdest dichotomy I've ever experienced in my life. But yeah, and so back with the Smurls here, a lot of times when we go into these cases where you're dealing with this kind of like evil, demonic, negative stuff, you're going to find, I don't know how many cases we went on, Tim, where we had substance abuse in the house, adultery,
daily Ouija board use.
Daily Ouija. I mean,
not that Ouija boards are inherently bad. It's the intent, is my belief, anyways. But I mean, we've talked about the scariest investigation we've ever been on. That dude was using a Ouija board trying to contact something.
This one is mind priest.
Yeah,
in Latin. But it's not uncommon to find some kind of anchor that basically brings these things in. Now, the Smurl family, there really wasn't that. And so my theory, and this is purely speculation on my part, so take it for what it's worth, is that somebody who had that duplex beforehand probably had something like that in their life that brought that in. And when they left, that negative entity, negative energy, just subsisted there. I mean, they talked about a spirit of a gentleman who killed his wife and his wife's spirit being there. I mean, homicide could bring something like that in.
My thought was squatters and Ouija board use.
Squatters. I mean, there really could be any number of things.
Well, and they talk about a case similar to this in the Demonologist book by Gerald Bitter, right?
Brittle.
When they talk about the infestation, encroachment, all that in that book, one of the cases they talk about is another family is very similar, kind of well-to-do family that bought this really nice house, and the stuff was just already there when they moved in.
Mm-hmm. And that can happen. I mean, actually, when we first started the paranormal team, one of our investigators, her side job was to clean out foreclosure homes. And she actually called me one night and said, "Hey, I'm cleaning this foreclosure home. Can you come here right now?" And so I went up there, and there was definitely some stuff in that foreclosure home. I mean, there was like satanic symbols the previous owners had drawn on the walls. We actually got a really cool ghost photo out of that house where you could see some dude
in the closet.
standing in the closet. But, whoever had been in that home before had definitely invited some stuff in. And my guess is that whoever moved into that home, if they didn't bless it, would probably deal with some of that stuff.
So far, my opinion on the Smurls is they were legit, like, down on their luck. They just wrong place, wrong time. They weren't aware of anything going on in the house like the Lutz family did. I don't feel like... I know eventually we get into the point where the Smurls, they've called in the Warrens come in, they start conducting an investigation. During that initial investigation, when they started going around the house and some of the stuff they saw had convinced Ed and Lorraine Warren that there was definitely something going on there. Because like any good investigator, you're going to kind of take everything someone tells you at face value. And it's not that we don't believe you. For the most part, we're going to believe you. That's why we're there checking you out.
You can usually tell the crazies right off the bat.
There was more before they called the Warrens where they had gone on a camping trip and it followed them on their camping trip.
Yeah, they went to the Poconos.
And then even when they weren't home, neighbors were experiencing weird, loud things happening at their house when nobody was home. So neighbors were experiencing things.
Yeah, in the movie, it made it look like there was basically like domestic violence
happening.
And like a rave going on. In
right.
This.
Lights and then...
Lights flashing on and off, loud noises. I think they actually called the cops.
Right.
And the cops came and found nothing.
And even at Jack's work, at his place of employment, other coworkers were having weird things happening at work where he was there, and weird shit was going on with him there. So it was like attaching to them, and when they were leaving the house, was still having weird shit.
Well, it followed him on that camping trip that you talked about. At one point, Ed said that it hurled a large, heavy garbage can at Jack.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was probably other stuff that happened on the camping trip.
Well, so the Warrens, after kind of their investigation, they call in Father McKenna.
Well, what I thought was interesting on that first investigation, they were going around the house. I believe Lorraine and their team was upstairs, and from the sounds of it, I think Ed was downstairs. They turn off the lights, and we do that sometimes on investigations because, we talked about it, like if you're kind of fine-tuning your other senses because your eyes can be a little deceiving sometimes, and you kind of go off of your feeling, just kind of feeling the energy, trying to hear stuff, kind of fill out the place. And he started throwing holy water around, like trying to command these demons to leave the house. And at that point,
religious provocation.
Yes. So at that point, when he did that, foul odor. I mean, this was going on for like the whole 10 years.
It's funny because I keep meaning to mention that and I keep forgetting. But yeah, they keep getting the smell of rotten meat periodically from, almost day one.
Yeah, and even when they were trying to get intimate, they would release that foul odor and to get them out of the mood. And
it would smell like raw sewage and stuff like that. So Ed turned out the lights using holy water, commanded the demons to be gone. Immediately after, it started pounding on the walls. It tore a mirror from a bureau, and it made a TV light up and start glowing, and it lit up the entire room with color, is what Ed says. The thing about the TV is it wasn't plugged in.
I was going to say, yeah.
It's funny because that was another thing I forgot to mention is part of the problems they're having is they're trying to save money because, they were really kind of strapped. And so they were leaving appliances unplugged that weren't being used. And unplugged appliances would just randomly catch fire.
Yeah, they show that in the movie. Like, very beginning, they're all leaving to go to work and the toaster catches on fire. And he's like, it's not even plugged in.
Radios going off, alarms.
Yeah, electric stuff just kind of going haywire.
So after this, Ed's like, yeah, we're dealing with the demonic entity. So that's when they hit up Father McKenna because the Catholic Church didn't want to help them.
So Father McKenna, he is an interesting character, and if you research any of the Warren stuff, they work a lot with Father McKenna. He eventually gets promoted to Bishop McKenna. In fact, during this case, he gets promoted to Bishop McKenna. But he, so I guess in the 60s, the Catholics had what's called Vatican II, where they revised and changed some stuff. I believe part of it was you could do Mass in English. It didn't have to be in Latin. Prior to the 60s, it always had to be in Latin. But Father McKenna is kind of an old diehard, and so he chooses not to conform to the changes.
Yeah, Ed refers to him as a traditionalist priest.
Yeah, and so he comes in and basically conducts an exorcist of the home, and it actually doesn't work.
Did they bring in another father before him?
Not before. I think Father McKenna was the first.
Okay, he was the first.
In the movie, they say that like the local clergy comes in, and which I don't think ever happened. Like everything I read on Wikipedia, when they did have other priests come in, none of the priests ever admitted to feeling anything or thinking that something was out of place. In the movie, they had a guy come in and he was going around each room blessing the house and he started feeling sick and he had to get out of the house.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't know if it was Father McKenna in the movie that was like, yeah, this wants to kill you. There was a priest in the movie that told the family that told Jack that. And I'm like, oh, that's something you tell
But first,
somebody.
I haven't seen the movie since 1991, so I couldn't tell you.
No, I just watched it this morning.
I want to go watch it now because I remember that one scared the crap out of me when I was
it's
younger.
a lot cheesier.
It's so cheesy.
Oh, I'm sure it is now, especially after the stuff I've actually seen and experienced. To be like, yeah, whatever.
But so the first one obviously didn't take, but what I thought was interesting is when they were going around looking through the rooms to see if there was any more signs of infestation, the kitchen smelled like roses.
And what's interesting is that actually happens in a lot of exorcisms that they smell roses after. But they so things do get better for a short period of time, but then they ramp up even worse.
I think this is when, according to the interview, this is when the attack started happening.
Right, and they start actually getting physically attacked. This is when a lot of the levitations start happening, a lot of getting thrown around. And if I recall correctly, I believe Father McKenna came in and did a second exorcism.
He did. And now keep in mind that the Smurls were like good standing members of their church. I believe they were Catholic as well. And they were trying to get their own fathers and priests to come in. And the church was kind of distancing themselves from this. And it's not uncommon in cases like this.
So just
for the Catholic Church to do this.
Yeah, so a little bit of background on the Catholic Church. I'm not Catholic, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But with a lot of these cases, the Catholic Church, they kind of approach it from a very skeptical standpoint. I mean, they really want a lot of proof and evidence before they're willing to get involved. And I think a lot of that is they just don't want to get involved in something that ends up being nothing and then look foolish. And so until they've got a lot of evidence in their mind, they try not to get involved in these. They kind of do their best to stay away from these kind of cases unless they have no choice.
And I think that's where the Warrens are great in that aspect because they were Catholic and Ed was more or less like an unofficial demonologist for the Catholic Church. Because to go into actual demonologist for the Catholic Church, like you have to be a priest or a father or whatever, and you have to go through the Vatican training. So Ed was like an unofficial demonologist for the church. So sometimes they would send him in first.
And they would recognize his recommendations. But yeah, a lot of times they'd wait for someone like Ed to say, no, this is real. And then the church would be like, okay.
And they spent 6 months. They spent like 6 months staying at their house off and on and actually telling the Vatican that they needed help and they still weren't trying to help them, huh?
Yeah, the official Catholic Church, they took quite a while to finally get involved.
Was it after the movie?
It was like in 1989. It was about, I think, when they finally got involved.
So kind of to jump ahead, what actually got the church involved is, so the Warrens helped for a little while. They, we did what we can do. They were still having issues, and so the Smurl family actually finally went to the media, which
I think
was,
it was
probably good or bad for both reasons, or for a couple of reasons.
I think it was right around the second exorcism that Father McKenna did. It might have been just before or just after. I think it was just after because like that one only lasted like 2 days. So the first one lasted for I think maybe a couple weeks or maybe a couple months. The second exorcism that Father McKenna performed, it was good for 2 days. At one point they actually saw, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Janet or Jack. I think it was Janet. Was home alone in the living room and saw this glowing apparition, this woman just appear in the living room and then vanish. And this was literally like 2 days after the second exorcism. And they were just, like you said, they were very distraught. They didn't know what to do. Nothing was working. They couldn't get the Catholic Church involved. In the movie, they kind of hint at like, well, if they won't listen to us, we're going to go to the media and maybe we can scare them into helping us.
And that ended up being kind of a double-edged sword. So now they bring in another medium. I can't recall her name off the top of my head, but she didn't have any real information on what the Warrens had done, but she came in, she identified 4 spirits. And interestingly enough, she identified a demonic spirit, an old lady, a guy who'd murdered his wife, and the spirit of the wife. So interestingly enough, she basically verified everything Lorraine Warren said, which to me is kind of fascinating because I've had instances like that too where I've brought different mediums into location and gotten the same information.
I was there for one of them.
Mm-hmm. In fact,
I was in there for the first investigation. I was there for the second one. And Yeah, the medium we had with us at the time had confirmed everything the other medium had told you like a week before.
Yeah, in fact, I've had that happen to me numerous times. In fact, there's a great big portal over my parents' house. I had a medium tell me about once, and without saying anything, I brought another medium there. She saw it. And then a third medium, he saw it as well, without me prompting them or sharing that. And so, so that does happen. And that actually, to me, lends credibility to instances like that. But she came in, identifies the same spirits. And then the Smurls go to the media. And unfortunately, the downside of that is they unleashed a media circus upon themselves. News vans are camped out in their front yard. Weirdos are like knocking on their windows, peeking in their windows. Their house becomes basically a tourist attraction because everybody who's seen this on the news wants to go see the haunted house. So not only are they dealing with stuff inside the house, they're dealing with wackadoos and crazies, basically pestering them nonstop.
Update, shit like that still happens because when the first Conjuring movie came out, the owners of the house in Rhode Island was being swarmed by quote-unquote investigators or just like looky-loos that wanted to see the house from the movie. So it still happens even to this day when something hits the media like that. People are they want to go check it out.
Yeah, all the wackadoos come out of the woodwork.
The real investigators, we wait a couple years later and then we go.
So now the positive side of this double-edged sword. So the first blade of the double-edged sword is them just turning it into a media circus.
Yeah.
The second part that was positive though is the Scranton Diocese. Finally, I think probably from some pressure from all the media coverage, is like, okay, we'll get involved. And so they sent out a group of priests. And then at this point, the Warrens also got involved again. In fact, I guess some of the reporters were like, hey, we want to spend a night in the house. And Ed Warren said, nope, I'm in charge. Ain't no reporters coming in here.
I think he kept in constant contact with the Smurls. Like Ghosty said, they were living there on and off, but they were talking to the Smurls like daily, getting updates. And Ed could see from after the second exorcism, just stuff that Jack was telling him. He could see that things were ramping up and getting worse right away.
In fact, Ed actually said that they'd gone from encroachment and infestation to an oppression state, where the members of the family were depressed all the time, just from the constant harassment. And for those who follow the demonic progression of things, oppression is the next step before actual possession. After possession is death.
Isn't there 5 stages, right? The invitation, infestation.
Invitation, encroachment.
Infestation, oppression, and then full-on possession.
And then death. Death is the last one.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And sadly, we've actually even seen, doing investigating, we've actually seen the possession/death part. And
I was not really heavily involved in that case, but I was aware of it going on. And that was when I first started investigating with you. And it was kind of...
That was a tough one.
You see stuff like that and you're just like, am I doing the right thing?
Yeah, am I setting myself up for getting...
Because I can only imagine how many of these thousands of cases the Wardens did where they actually dealt with family members or people that they were trying to help die, and that weighs on you.
Yeah, in fact...
Because you feel helpless. You're like, I'm supposed to be helping this person. I'm supposed to help them get better, and when that person takes their own life or they die for whatever reason, you feel like you've failed.
Exactly. In fact, that case, not to get too far off what we're talking about, but yeah, I involved this individual. They were full on the possession stage. They'd been involved in black magic and conjuring and inviting stuff into themselves. They finally contacted us during the possession stage, got their LDS bishop involved. I don't think that individual, though, was actually ready or willing to give up the spirit they'd invited into themselves. And eventually that bishop contacted me and told me that individual took their own life. So that's a hard thing to deal with when you're trying to help people.
Fortunately, in the Smurl case, no one died.
No, and in fact, they actually finally got rid of the problem eventually. But so they kind of did like a mass exorcism. They brought in a bunch of different priests and kind of did like a mass group prayer, mass exorcism with, by mass exorcism, I mean they had multiple priests participating. To kind of help deal with the problem. I still don't think it helped completely. I think things calmed down a little bit.
Weren't they able to move eventually? Going to the media, I think that sparked that attention they needed, and they did get enough money after the movie to help them pick up and move.
They did, and
I think it might have been money from the book because the family got with an author and they wrote the book in 1986.
Okay,
the movie came out in 1991.
Okay, because I know they did get money from something, and it was more of like I could see how this could help, not just like a cash grab for the for the Warrens, but it was more in a situation that helped their the situation the Smurls were in. Now they had a little bit of extra money. Now they can finally pay to upgrade.
Now,
and
keep in
move
mind,
somewhere.
I don't think the Warrens made any money off of this case whatsoever. But where I'm going to say that you've all heard my opinion before on the Lutz family. I felt George Lutz was very opportunistic. I think he moved in that house with the sole purpose of trying to make money off of it.
Well, I mean, look what he
I
did
think the
with
Lutz
day
family
one.
was a get-rich-quick type thing. They were in the house for 30 days or 28 days or however long they were in the house.
which isn't really consistent with other demonic style
Right.
hauntings.
So I still will swear up and down I think the Lutz knew what the hell they were doing. They were aware of the DeFeo killings. The Smurl family, like we've mentioned a couple times already, they had no idea that there was anything wrong with the house. Like it was a slow burn over
13 years.
13 years before the Warrens even got involved.
Well, and what's interesting is Tim and we've talked to Andrea Perrin from the original Conjuring.
Yes.
We actually spent a couple of days with her. Very neat lady. But when we talked to her about the actual Conjuring case,
The stuff that she told us is scarier than you'll see in the movie.
the stuff you see in the movie feels like it takes place over the course of a month or two.
Yeah, it was 10 years.
Yeah, these cases are slow burn. These demonic spirits are in no hurry. It starts small and gets bigger and bigger, but I mean, it can take a decade or two for these cases to ramp up to their full potential.
Well, like as we mentioned, we were like 13 years before it fully ramped up for the Smurl family. So after 13 years, then they wrote a book. So to me, it's like, I don't think they're going into this house with the idea of like, okay, we know it's haunted. Let's wait 13 years of suffering before we write a book.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't think the Smurls were intentionally trying to make money off of this. I think they were at their wits' end when they brought the media in because they didn't know what to do.
Well, and they're in actual danger. I mean, at one point in this whole hunting, they had a chandelier come crashing down, which badly
Right.
cut one of their
Oh, yeah, I
daughters.
forgot.
Yeah, and they had a daughter get thrown down the stairs, and the wife get thrown against the wall, and the dog. Yeah, they were in danger.
So what to me is most interesting about this particular case though, is how it finally eventually ended. So they had this mass exorcism of all these priests, the mass parrot groups.
And did it end after the move? Because didn't they move, and it still followed them?
Right. And so things calmed down, but they didn't quit, and they did move. And then Jack actually had another succubus type experience and saw this entity that they'd been seeing. And it basically asked Jack to surrender and to let it in, at which point he refused. And that was the last hurrah after that, everything just finally died, which to me sounds an awful lot like the demon or demonic spirit or whatever you want to call it was asking to enter the possession phase. And after all that failed, it's like, okay, enough.
Next.
I thought was interesting with this is with all of this stuff going on, Ed described Jack as a very hardworking, very stubborn man. Like he was one of those people that, this is his place, this is his house. He wants the problem fixed, and he wants it fixed now, and he's not going to let anyone or anything in this case push him around and tell him what to do. So the fact that he was able to stay strong through this for the course of 16 years, I think, is the total time that they spent dealing with this entity, is just amazing to me. I recently found out when I was doing some of the research, he did pass away in 2017.
Oh, okay.
Jack did. And I believe at the time, I didn't look any other. I actually read his obituary. That's where I got the names for all the family members. Because in the movie, they changed some of the names, and in the interview, they didn't mention all of the family. But in his obituary, it mentioned all of his family members. But yeah, Jack passed away in 2017. And from what I understand, like you said, there was no issues after
I do
that.
think one of the daughters, Dawn, became a paranormal investigator afterwards.
I believe so, yeah.
Which I could see. I mean,
Yeah, there's always one of them out of the kids.
well, I
Like
mean,
Andrea.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. My paranormal experiences as a kid are kind of what brought me down this path.
Same.
I'm
It would make sense. Dawn was 17 when all this stuff started ramping up. So, and she's like right there at that age. Like you said, you hit puberty, and that's when women even men, when you're going through puberty, that's when they're most susceptible to entities like this.
Right. Your body's going through changes. Your hormones are changing. You're putting off all kinds of energy. And again, if you take it from the religious approach, I talked about those, spirits wanting to target women because of their ability to create. That's the time when a child's becoming an adult. And honestly, anyone who knows a teenager knows that that's when they're most susceptible to outside influences. They make poor decisions. So yeah, this is all going on while those kids are, both the ones born at the house and the other ones through these teen years. But the crazy thing is these demonic spirits, any spirit isn't really subject to time. And so for them to just chill in a house for, 10, 20, 50, 100 years, waiting for the right combination of family to come along to make its move, and then taking another decade or two to, go from encroachment to infestation to...
They got all the time in the world.
Yeah, they don't care.
To them, it could be like 10 minutes. They're like, okay.
Yeah.
That's why it'd be like after 13 years, it's like, okay, well, I'll just go try somebody else. Because to them, it could have been like, 13 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It could have been 1,300 years. It just, that time doesn't affect spirits in general the way it does us. So for us, we think, man, that's an awfully long time. But even talking to Andrea Perrin about the Conjuring stuff, when you hear it, that case was a pretty slow burn in and of itself. Whereas the movie makes it seem like it was
all happened
within the course like 30 days.
Out of all of the cases I've studied and researched, there's only one where it started happening from day one, and I still think that they're full of shit. And that's the Lutz family. So, you look at the Smurl case here, even the Edenfield case, the Perrin family. You go looking at some of the other cases, it's not as well known that it was an Ed and Lorraine Warren case because they don't really mention it in the movie, but the haunting in Connecticut. The Warrens were very involved in that, as well as John Zaffis, their nephew. All of this stuff, these really high-profile cases, this is not stuff that's happening overnight.
No, and even the cases we've dealt with, Cleve Evans, for instance.
20 years.
20 years. It's 20 years of stuff before we finally figured it out.
That was like 10 years ago. So at this point, if he's still dealing with it, it's 30 years.
I keep in contact with Cleve, and all is well. I think once we figured out what the actual problem was and broke those attachments, I think all was well. But it took a few decades for that to get sorted out. And even for us, it took probably a dozen visits to figure it out and get it sorted out.
I don't like recommending my old show to people and telling them to go back to listen, but it's like the second or third episode on the Supernatural Hour. Cleve came on and told his story, and it is a very fascinating story. I think you should go listen to it.
In fact, I don't even think we'd wrapped it up when we were interviewing Cleve.
No, we were still in the process of doing his investigation. We hadn't finished everything yet.
Yeah.
It was a couple of years after that interview.
But yeah, that was probably one of our harder, more difficult cases. When we finally got it figured out and resolved, that was very satisfying. But he had both his home and his cabin, which were deeply infested. That case was... that case kept me awake a few nights trying to figure out how to puzzle through that thing and figure out what was going on.
It's always fun when you're getting Latin text messages from your best friend.
I actually have saved all those text messages. I still have those text messages.
I got rid of them because at the time I was not as strong as I am now. I didn't want anything to do with them.
Yeah, so just not to go too far down a different rabbit hole in your show, but while we were dealing with this case, we were actually getting text messages in Latin, threats, things of that nature by the entity that was in his house. In fact, they're coming from one of our friends' phone, but that friend was with him at the time, so there's no way.
One of the times, yeah.
There's no way she could have sent them from her phone.
I was actually on my way to her house, and it had been like 5 minutes after she sent it. And I got there, and I'm like, knock on the door, and she's just vacuuming. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, just cleaning my house. So I went and grabbed her phone, had her unlock it for me, and I just started going through her phone without telling her what I was doing. And none of it was on her end. And I showed her my phone and showed her everything that was on my end. And she's like, I don't remember doing any of that.
Yeah. So, but again, his case was a slow burn. It was 20 or 30 years worth of stuff. And same thing, started small, got worse and worse and worse. To him waking up in bed, paralyzed, hearing voices that were not his coming out of his body. Yeah. So the Smurl case, one of the more interesting, scary cases. I mean, the reality is with these kind of cases, there's a lot of things that we can do as individuals to invite this kind of garbage into our lives, make our lives very difficult. But sometimes...
Or you could just stumble across it.
Yeah, say sometimes it's the right person in the wrong place at the right time, and it just... all of a sudden you find yourself in a mess.
Or bring another Ouija board in and bring more spirits in, see if they'll battle each other out.
Battling Ouija board. Just set up 2 spirit boards.
Spirit dance off.
Set up 2 spirit boards and see if you can get them to say the same
Fight
thing.
fire with fire.
That would be interesting. Because if you... Oh, I almost want to conduct an experiment now. I want to get 2 spirit boards and see if we can get them to say the same thing. Like have our backs to each other. So we're not seeing each other's spirit boards. But then have cameras recording it so we can see, like, oh my.
Oh, that'd be fun.
When your unplugged appliances catch fire, give me a call.
Yeah, we gotta find a place to do this at. We're not doing that here.
No, we'll do it in a cemetery.
Oh, perfect.
Where you get your ass grabbed.
Oh, I love it. Let's do it at that cemetery, actually.
Sounds like a great idea.
Oh, shit. Anything else on the Smurl case?
That's all I can think of, unless you guys have any avenues that you want to explore.
I
think we're good.
Like I've already said, I don't think this is one of those. I don't think the family is making it up. I think this was 100% legit.
Yep, I agree.
Well, and the reality is, I mean, as Ghosty said, the only money they made was off the book, and they used that money to get the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah.
So nobody got rich on this. Nobody got. I mean, is there fame? Maybe a tiny bit, but not like.
And they regretted it almost instantly.
Yeah.
Going to the media. Just because, like you said, that they were all over the place. I think it's funny. I think I missed this part in the movie, but Lorraine Warren was actually one of the reporters that fainted in the movie.
Oh, was she? I must go back and look.
I read that if you look at IMDb.com, she's actually listed as uncredited. And I read in the trivia notes that there was a reporter that fainted. And I missed it because I was like watching the movie, and then I was also reading the interview and taking notes at the same time. So I was like multitasking. And I didn't see the part, so I want to go back and watch it. But apparently there's a part where there's a reporter that faints. That was the actual Lorraine Warren.
Oh, interesting. I was going to say, I loved her cameo in The Conjuring, so it wouldn't surprise me if
a
she
lot
had a cameo in that too.
In the first Conjuring movie, I know that they were making things theatrical and everything. And it almost seems like James Wan watched this first movie from 1991 and was trying to recycle some of the material that happened to the Smurl family and make it seem like it happened to them. Because, like... when we were talking to from the Conjuring House, Andrea, God, I couldn't think of her name for a second.
I'm friends with her on Facebook.
Yeah, she didn't add me. Thanks, Andrea. But
she's got taste.
Yeah, taste for ginger.
Doesn't everybody? Don't be jealous.
Like she was saying that they totally Hollywooded that up. Like that never happened. Her getting thrown against the wall never happened. But you know who it did happen to? The Smurls. So it sounds like he was taking that whole thing and kind of adding it to the first Conjuring movie.
That's another one I'll tell you. Go back to listen to the others. Listen to our Castles Night interview with Andrea. It was a very fascinating interview.
And again, that Conjuring case was actually more of a slow burn than the movie leads you to believe.
Right.
But I will give James Wan credit in that he does tell a good tale.
Yeah.
And the reality is he does stick to kind of the spirit of what happened. I know, like, I can't remember if it's Conjuring 2 with Bill. Was that Conjuring 2 or 3?
2.
Bill was 2.
Yeah. I actually researched that case quite a bit before that Conjuring came out. And although some of it is...
yeah, you and I had talked about the Edenfield case before.
Yeah, even though a lot of it was dramatized for, a movie.
Yeah.
They also did stick to a lot of the facts that were involved.
That all started with the Ouija board.
Uh-huh.
A homemade one, actually.
But yeah, I did like... It was kind of cool watching that movie because I know I haven't seen it since the 90s, early 90s when I was a little kid. And I do remember seeing... Where was that even on? Like, it looks like it was a Lifetime movie. But
I never saw it before today.
I know I had seen it when I was a kid. I know I have because there was things that were like popping up memories. And I'm like, I remember this. But I didn't really, at that age, the age I was watching this, I didn't really know what was happening or how to process that. But that was pretty nuts.
See, The Conjuring 3, though, you can tell James Wan didn't have as much involvement in it because there was a lot of like random stuff that just didn't make any sense. That wasn't true to any of the story. But yeah, that's all I got. So if you feel like we've left something out on the Smurl case, or if you want to know more, we probably don't have more to give you, but you can email us at evp.pod@gmail.com. Hit us up on the social medias at evp.pod. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Check out some of DVO's reaction videos.
Those are my favorite, by the way.
Yeah, I like those too. All right.
After that, check out our affiliate link to ghoststop.com. Buy some ghost hunting equipment and come talk to ghosts with us. We've decided last week that we're no longer after our ghost yacht. We're trying to buy a haunted restaurant so we can open up booze and
Cues. Booze and cues.
Don't say the name. Copyrighted. But yeah.
Ghosts, you don't play that.
Peace out, butterflies.
Later.
This is the EVP Podcast.